If I was to pick from this category what the most hair safe ones are, milligram for milligram, I would say What's up guys, Derek, moreplacemoredates.com. Today we are going to be talking about the most hair safe anabolic androgenic steroid from each family of the anabolic steroid family tree. So as you probably, well, if you haven't seen it, I recommend you check out that video. It is literally called the anabolic steroid family tree. I'll put a card up in the corner, and basically it subdivides each anabolic into its, like derivative subcategory. So at the top of the family tree, we have testosterone, and then everything else is derived from that, and it comes into its own, like subcategories where we have, derivatives of testosterone sort of in that middle category. And on the left and right side of that, we have DHT and derivatives of DHT, and 19-nortestosterone, also known as Nandrolone, and derivatives of 19-nortestosterone, which are, things that are, the trenbolones, the nandrolones, etc. So basically, which are the most hair-safe compounds from each family? This is something I've been asked to cover for a while now, and it's been on my to-do list, and I figured I'd just knock out a quick video kind of elaborating. It gets more, there is nuance to it. It's not as simple as just this is the most safe one, and you can stack them alongside each other for the most hair-safe cycle, because there are conflicting things that occur to make each one hair-safe, and it gets a bit complicated, and I've done videos on like those individual topics before, but you'll have to dig through some of my old playlists to find them. So I just want to simplify this video and just be like, each category specifically, which is the most hair safe. So starting in the testosterone derivatives category, we have things like testosterone, we have EQ, boldenone, we have dianabol, we have turinabol, we have halotestin. These are the most notable compounds in this, like middle family of compounds. And which is the most hair safe? Well, it kind of depends on, again, what you're willing to use with it. Testosterone on its own is not. It's actually one of the worst in this family. However, when you inhibit 5-alpha reductase with something like finasteride, which, is obviously potent in itself, but above and beyond that, if you really wanted to push it, inhibiting 5-AR entirely with dutasteride makes testosterone relatively benign in a hair loss context. And it is because it is largely what regulates skeletal muscle growth in humans is testosterone, and 5-alpha reduction into DHT largely regulates the development and maturation of secondary sexual characteristics like, growing your dank during puberty. But once you're an adult, maintaining that is not necessarily a super androgenic process. Of course, having DHT is important for neurology, fertility, a myriad of different things, maybe even anti-cancer in some contexts. And I'm not going to go into that rabbit hole, because I do agree that inhibiting DHT is not necessarily healthy for an individual. However, that's where you get into the pros and cons of, the mental unhealthiness of losing your hair and how that affects your stress levels and your depression and whatnot versus, being healthy from an overall performance and everything else aspect. So it's kind of like you weigh your, pros and cons in that regard. So anyways, testosterone, I would say, when you're inhibiting when you're inhibiting all 5-alpha reduction into DHT with dutasteride, it's probably the most overall well-tolerated hair-safe compound of the bunch, because with dianabol, you can't really get in the middle with 5-AR inhibition that much and make that much of a difference. The parent compound, I would say, is probably more problematic overall than testosterone. It's not really a sustainable option as a long-term base anyways. Like obviously, it could be a HRT replacement, and it was used for that clinically, but just anecdotally, it does not seem to be a long-term viable solution as kind of like a main, like I'm trying to put in the concept of like a staple anabolic that could be run like relatively long-term with a relative lack of incidence of issues, as well as hair safe, ish. So I would say testosterone, whilst inhibiting DHT, however much you're comfortable with, is probably the best option. You could look at something like, turinabol is, relatively benign, but again, it's not something that is a substrate for aromatase. So when you're actually choosing something from this category, is turinabol going to be your test base? Obviously not. So like you might as well just disregard that option entirely, because you would end up having to use like testosterone with it anyways, probably, unless you're willing to run like Turinabol plus exogenous estrogen or DHEA or something that is ultimately going to lead to testosterone and estrogen anyways. You know, it's kind of off the table. And same with Halo, is brutal for your hair, don't touch that. But so like EQ, how hair safe is that? Honestly, it's pretty it's one of the more well-tolerated compounds, and you can get in the middle of the 5-alpha reduction to dihydroboldenone with a 5-AR inhibitor. I don't really think it's a potent substrate for 5-AR to begin with, so I don't know how much of a difference it really makes at the end of the day. But the parent compound, boldenone, is not too bad in a hair context. However, the compound itself has so many issues, like its ability to crash estrogen, which is going to be bad for your hair, or, you know, its effect on, I've done a video basically deep diving into boldenone, and I'll put up a card. It was like the truth about EQ or boldenone. I'll make sure I put up a card there, and it is a deep dive into why I'm not really a big fan of it. So when you stack up maybe like boldenone to test with a 5-AR inhibitor, frankly, I think that the potential for use is better with, you know, the bioidentical hormone we rely on and know what to expect from, and has pretty good outcomes whilst inhibiting 5-AR in a hair loss context, and everything else is kind of backfilled accordingly in a good way where you don't have to worry about too many health consequences as much as something like a boldenone or a Dianabol that is, you know, from the middle column. So I would say testosterone plus finasteride or dutasteride would be like the most hair safe in the testosterone column, just overall. Now, looking at the DHT derivatives, on paper, you would think that primobolan would be the best. It has like the best, you know, tissue selectivity on paper. It's well tolerated in women clinically. It's like the most well tolerated compound at the highest dosage ever recorded in clinical history. It's like 1200 milligrams. However, in a practical application, how hair safe is it? It's not. It's brutal, unfortunately. And this is with pharma grade primo, yes, not, you know, fake fucking, you know, something else. It is literally one of the worst, well, it's not one of the worst, but it is pretty bad for hair. And, you know, it will shred you to pieces if you are prone to male pattern baldness, unfortunately, which sucks because this is one of the more refined and progressive anabolics that has most of the kinks worked out of it and is far safer to use than many other anabolic agents, and frankly would be a staple as an anabolic for somebody who doesn't care about hair. Like, frankly, this is one of the best compounds you could possibly deploy in a well-tolerated anabolic, you know, aspect if you were to disregard the hair. So, you know, obviously at the end of the day, there's guys who are going to be like, fuck your hair. Like, do you want to be safe? Do you want to put on gains? Do you want to blah, blah, blah? You know, and it's like, you know, everyone has their own opinion. So this is geared towards guys who have an opinion about their hair, and we don't need the just shave it bro guys coming in and being like,
fucking stop caring about your hair, go bald like me.
It's like, okay bro, like we get it. So anyways, primo is not hair safe, unfortunately. Neither is masteron, neither is many of the compounds in this class, unfortunately, even though they are literally designed to be more tissue selective than testosterone. That is the intended point of every single one of these anabolic agents. They were supposed to be replacements for testosterone in a clinical setting, but unfortunately in practical application, many of them fall short of the mark. Masteron shown clinically to be, you know, well tolerated and be, you know, hair safe, even though it'll fucking nuke you if you actually use it and you're prone to hair loss. It is like the most blatantly obvious compound that is bad for you if you have hair loss. You know, and a lot of this stuff is contradictory to the, you know, Hirschberger assays and whatnot that you see on paper and these tissue selectivity models that they use as reference points in the clinical data. Some of this stuff is like anecdotal reports trump the actual evidence, unfortunately, and we kind of have to go by personal experience and the myriads of bodybuilders and guys who have been seeking performance enhancement that are prone to hair loss and have cumulatively reported that certain compounds are much worse than others, even when they're used in pharma grade and are in fact confirmed to be what they are in fact are. So from this column, you know, pretty much everything is a write-off, unfortunately. We have Masteron, terrible. Primo, terrible. What else do we have in here? We have Anadrol, which I've hypothesized may be tolerable and decently hair safe at a benign, like much lower dosage than is used and recommended to use clinically, where, you know, the dosage exceeds even that what many bodybuilders would use for performance enhancement and hypertrophy. So maybe it's hair safe if you use it at a reasonable dose. It might be more hair safe. Superdrol, interesting one that is actually relatively hair safe at the dosage that produces significant outcomes. Unfortunately, is like one of the worst compounds for health. So, you know, it's kind of like, it's not like you could depend on it as your main anabolic. What else in this category? We have the Winstrol, horrible for your hair. Proviron, brutal for your hair. DHB, technically in this family, you know, you could argue it's in the testosterone category, but it is indeed the 5-alpha reduced metabolite. So I'm just going to put it in this class because many people would. Logically, DHT, you know, the 5-alpha reduced metabolite of testosterone, and these are the derivatives of DHT, you know, whatever. DHB is going in this category. DHB, not hair safe either. So we're kind of left with Anavar, Superdrol, and Winstrol at reasonable dosages. Which of those compounds is well tolerated for a like medium to long-term exposure? Not Superdrol, probably. Maybe Anavar. Like Anavar is probably the classically known hair safe compound. In reality, at moderate dosages, it is not that hair safe. Like it is for the dosages being used in most people who are using it, which is women. But you have to keep in mind those women have an immaculate 120,000 hair follicles on their head that haven't been miniaturized, and they're often using dosages far lower than what a male would be using. So a male with like real Anavar, you know, 30, 40 milligrams, it's gonna be pretty substantial on your hair. It's better probably than the other compounds at an equivalent weekly dosage, but it's not necessarily hair safe. If I was to pick from this category what the most hair safe ones are, milligram for milligram, I would say Anavar, maybe Anadrol, and Superdrol is probably, might even be arguably the most hair safe. However, it is just the duration of exposure that you can use and the fact that it's kind of a shitty health compound in general that sort of like, again, brings up the pros and cons and what can be tolerated long-term as a dependable long-term anabolic. You'll probably lean more in the direction of Anavar, but just be aware, none of these compounds are necessarily like, I don't know, like they're better than the other options, obviously. It's unfortunate though that the ones that are not oral, like Primobolan, you would hope is the most hair safe, but it's just not, even though the tissue selectivity implies otherwise. So stay away from those ones if you want to keep your hair, is my advice. Now moving on to the 19-nor derivatives. So we have Trenbolone, we have Trestolone, we have Steranabol, we have Check Drops, we have methyltrianolone, and there's a myriad of others, and the parent compound being Nandrolone. And this is the mistake everyone always makes when I refer to this. They're like, where's Deca? And it's like, dude, I've made a video on this. Nandrolone is the active compound. Deca, decanoate, is an ester. So do not say, where is Deca in this list? Because it is an ester that would be attached to any of these compounds if it was designed as such. Decanoate is not a compound. It is not the parent drug Nandrolone is. So Nandrolone is in fact here. It is the parent of this subfamily of anabolics. Now, which is the most hair safe? I don't really know for sure. One thing I can say is from what I do know, Nandrolone is by far the safest that I am aware of. One compound that has my interest though is Steranabol, and this is something that barely anyone talks about. And this is something that came to my attention from Broderick Chavez. He has great information, and he I saw his stuff like way back in the day on the Enhanced Athlete pages, and then, you know, I kind of like dug into some of his stuff. And he has mentioned Steranabol a handful of times, and he says it's like the most refined anabolic agent like ever designed, and it's like the Primobolan of 19 Nors essentially, and it is like super well tolerated and be the best drug for women if women were to take it, and blah blah blah. And it's impossible to get though, unfortunately, because no underground labs are really sourcing it, or you know, and it's not really available through the pharmaceutical realm anymore. And even when it was compounded at such a low milligram per milliliter that probably no one would have used it. So, and I did a video on it a while ago, and I found like the one picture on the internet that I could find of the stuff. It was like Upjohn Steranabol Retardo or something, and it was like the ester attached, it was like oxabolone cypionate or something like that. So anyways, I don't know if anyone has experience with that compound, but if you do, you know, drop it down below. When I did that video specifically, no one had any insight, so I highly doubt anyone has insight on it this time either. But if you do, and drop it down there, dude, because it would be super interesting. But Nandrolone, as far as I know, is far ahead of all the other compounds in this class. The reason being is because when it hits 5-alpha reductase, it actually converts into a less androgenic metabolite. So unlike many of its you know, the compounds designed that become more androgenic when they hit 5-AR, or, you know, parent testosterone that produces DHT, which is multiple fold more androgenic than the parent hormone and has a dissociation rate multiple times more problematic than testosterone. Nandrolone, on the other hand, 5-alpha reduces and 5-alpha reductase dense tissues into dihydronandrolone, which has a much lower binding affinity and is much less androgenic and much less problematic. It basically is like the anti-DHT. It basically converts into something that is very well tolerated. So basically the nandrolone in muscle tissue remains majorly as nandrolone, but then in all of the places, well, mainly your scalp, where you don't want androgenic activity, it 5-alpha reduces into this dihydronandrolone, which then when it attaches to AR is a lot less problematic than the parent hormone nandrolone. Now this is where you get into the weeds a bit, is stacking these compounds. For example, you would just think logically, okay, the most hair safe cycle ever is testosterone, dutasteride, plus like a topical anti-androgen, plus, you know, a sprinkle of Anavar with a bunch of nandrolone or something. And it's like, yeah, that makes, on paper, I could understand your logic in that, but you have to understand this is where you get into the nuance of nandrolone plus testosterone. Well, when you're inhibiting 5-alpha reductase to prevent testosterone to DHT, you're also consequently inhibiting the nandrolone conversion to dihydronandrolone, thus keeping the majority of the parent compound intact in your scalp, thus making nandrolone bind to AR and exert significant androgenic effects. So nandrolone itself is horrible for your hair, but when it 5-alpha reduces to DHN, it's not that bad whatsoever. So that's where you get into the weeds of, you can't even really stack test with DECA with a 5-AR inhibitor if you don't want to encounter you're either going to get hair loss from the test without the 5-AR, or you're going to get hair loss from the DECA with the 5-AR inhibited. So, you know, you get into the weeds a bit and you have to be a bit more creative with how you design your protocols. And it's not necessarily the healthiest way to go about cycle selection, unfortunately, but it is the predicament that many are put into. And ultimately you have to weigh the pros and cons. And what I will say is that if you are somebody looking for max longevity in the sport, max health, retaining your health in the long term and retaining high level, you know, neurological function, cardiovascular health, etc., I would probably advise against many of the, you know, hair safe protocols, because at the end of the day, they are not exactly conducive to optimal levels of health and performance. Like for me, if I was to look at, you know, with the ideal DHT derivative, Primobolan by far, you know, well, way better than pretty much everything else you could pick, but it's one of the most worst for your hair. So it's like, you know, you weigh the pros and the cons, and ultimately you have to make your own decision for what's important. So anyways, that is the breakdown. I can't believe that turned into a 20-minute video, but here we are. And you can see how this gets complicated. So that is a simple rundown of the most hair safe compounds from each list, or each family of compounds. And then I have more intricate details about like each one in videos I've done in the past, so just use the search bar, dig into my playlists, they're all there. So thank you guys for watching. Please like, subscribe, check out my blog, moreplates.com. Follow me on Instagram at moreplates_moredates, Facebook, Snapchat, BitChute, Twitter, TikTok, Apple Podcasts. If you want to support the channel, you can check out anything I'm associated with in the video description below. My TRT clinic, as well as Gorilla Mind nootropic formulas, as well as Gorilla Mode pre-workouts. I designed these myself from scratch, featuring the max efficacious dose and the synergistic combinations of ingredients I would want to see in these products myself. Gorilla Mode, the hybrid formula with the max dose of L-citrulline, glycer pump, betaine anhydrous as a good osmolite. We have a potent cognitive enhancing blend in there featuring the Kana and phenylethyl dimethylamine citrate, caffeine, huperzine A. This product is maxed out from all angles as a overall hybrid formula, and is very cost effective for what you're getting. And this is kind of like the turnkey product I would recommend for the majority of people. And we have the 9-gram dose of L-citrulline not inflated with malic acid on the label. Compare it to your current pre. I encourage you to just pull it out and start comparing, because I'm going to break down the other two now. So Gorilla Mode Nitric is the maxed out performance product with none of the stimulants. So you can use it at nighttime whenever you want. And it has 10 grams of L-citrulline, which is the max efficacious dose found in the clinical literature, where no more would it yield any additional benefit whatsoever. The malic acid added separately, just in case. So if there is some remaining performance enhancing benefit from malic acid, I wanted to make sure it was included, despite the fact that we have the max dose of pure L-citrulline. So I stacked it on top. So you're getting the max dose of L-citrulline, the max dose of malic acid separately, a higher dose of glycer pump, a higher dose of betaine. We have different vectors being addressed via vasodrive AP for inhibiting angiotensin converting enzyme. We have nitrosamine hitting the nitric oxide vector as well. And we have a fat dose of nitrates in there too through the sodium nitrate. This product is maxed out and hits vasodilation, hyperhydration, volumization from all aspects, and is completely maxed out in every regard for overall performance. Now moving on to the cost-effective Gorilla Mode Stim, also now rebranded as Gorilla Mode Energy, because this is essentially just a energy formula at the end of the day, as opposed to just being useful for pre-workout. This is the cost-effective version of Gorilla Mode. But for the stim junkies or those who just want a pre-workout that hits hard mentally and has none of the other performance elements, so it has no creatine, no L-citrulline, none of the pump ingredients, none of the volumizing agents, rather it has a 3-gram dose of L-tyrosine, which is, we had a high dose in the original hybrid formula, I forgot to mention as well, which is a great cognitive enhancing ingredient that is included in Gorilla Mode Classic. But we have 3 grams in Gorilla Mode Stim, Gorilla Mode Energy, and it is great for mood elevation, getting a bit of an energy boost there that is not driven purely by stimulants, and it complements the stimulants and nootropics very well in this formula. We doubled the dose of Kana. We increased the N-phenylethyl dimethylamine citrate, increased the caffeine. The huperzine is in there too. This product is a turnkey energy bomb, essentially, for the stim junkies or for those who just want a cost-effective pre that is pure mental performance and none of the other elements at a much more cheaper price point. So those are all of the pre-workouts, and anything else I'm associated with, it's in the video description below. Thank you guys for watching. Talk to you soon.